The smell of antiseptic filled the air as Elena Cruz pushed open the glass doors of City General Hospital. Her hands trembled as she guided her son toward the front desk, her heart pounding louder than the beeping monitors echoing down the sterile corridor. Lucas's small fingers clung to hers, his breathing shallow and uneven, the telltale signs of another allergic reaction. She had seen this before, but this one had come faster, fiercer, leaving her terrified. His lips were tinged pale, his eyes glossy with confusion as nurses rushed forward, wheeling a stretcher between them. "Peanut exposure," she gasped out, her voice cracking with fear. "He has a severe allergy. Please help him." The nurse nodded, already summoning a doctor. The next moments blurred into a rush of white coats and clinical commands. Elena stood frozen in the doorway, her palms pressed together in silent prayer as she watched her son disappear into the ICU. Her breath came in ragged bursts. Every mother's nightmare had returned. She had done everything right this time, checked every label, packed every lunch herself, yet fate had still found a way to test her. She sank into one of the cold metal chairs lining the hallway, her mind replaying Lucas's faint whisper in the car, "Mom, I can't breathe." She would never forget the panic in his voice. 7 years of single motherhood had made her strong, cautious, capable, but nothing prepared her for the helplessness of watching her child suffer. "Elena Cruz," a voice called from down the hall. A doctor approached, clipboard in hand. "He's responding to treatment. We've stabilized him. He'll need to stay overnight for observation." Relief hit her like a wave, making her knees buckle. "Thank you," she whispered, emotion thick in her throat. The doctor gave a reassuring nod before walking away, leaving her trembling but grateful. Then she heard it. Voice she had not heard in 7 long years. Deep, controlled, unmistakable. "I'm here for Sophia Blake. She was brought in about an hour ago." Her heart stuttered. The air seemed to drain from the corridor. Slowly, she turned toward the sound, and for a moment, the world tilted. Henry Blake stood at the nurse's station, tall and composed in a dark tailored suit that didn't belong in a hospital. His hair was shorter than she remembered, streaked with the faintest touch of silver at the temples. The billionaire CEO, the man who once promised her forever and then left her with nothing but silence, was now standing just a few feet away. Her breath caught. 7 years of carefully built composure threatened to crumble all at once. He didn't see her at first. He was too focused on the nurse's words, too absorbed in the urgency of his wife's condition. But then, as he turned, his gaze brushed past her and stopped. His blue eyes widened, confusion flashing into recognition. "Elena," he said quietly, disbelief threading through his voice. Her name on his lips was a sound she had buried long ago. Before she could think, Lucas's soft cough drew both their gazes downward. The boy had stepped out of the ICU room, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, his skin still pale but his eyes alert, hazel eyes that mirrored Henry's perfectly. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Henry stared, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. The resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same faint arch of the brow, the same way the boy tilted his head when curious. Elena's instinct kicked in. She stepped forward, gently guiding Lucas behind her as if shielding him from a storm. "Lucas, sweetheart, let's go sit down," she said softly. But Henry's voice broke through, raw and unsteady. "Wait," he whispered, the words barely audible but heavy enough to make her freeze. "Is that my son?" The question hung in the sterile air, more powerful than the monitors or the hum of machines. Elena turned toward him slowly, her expression composed, but her eyes blazing with pain and pride. 7 years of silence stood between them. 7 years of raising their child alone, of learning to breathe again after being left behind. Her lips trembled, but her voice was steady. "Yes, Henry," she said quietly. "This is Lucas. He's 7 years old." Henry's face drained of color as the truth hit. 7 years. 7 birthdays, 7 missed firsts. The hallway seemed to close in around him, and the mighty billionaire who commanded empires could only whisper in disbelief, "I have a son." The nurse's voice interrupted, calling him back to his other world. "Mr. Blake, your wife is asking for you." He stood frozen, torn between two doors, one leading to his sick wife, another to the child he had never known. Elena's hand tightened protectively around Lucas's. "Go," she said quietly. "Your wife needs you." But as he turned toward the other door, his eyes lingered on the boy, his reflection, his legacy, his second chance at everything he'd lost. And for the first time in his perfectly ordered life, Henry Blake felt truly powerless. The night outside the hospital was restless with sirens and drifting fog as Henry Blake stepped out into the parking lot, feeling the weight of a truth that refused to let him breathe. The image of the boy's eyes haunted him, hazel brown, just like his own, a mirror of everything he had denied himself for 7 long years. His mind kept replaying the moment Elena had whispered those words. "Yes, Henry, this is Lucas. He's 7 years old." The words had cut deeper than any failure or loss he had ever faced. He sat in his car, unmoving, while rain began to mist the windshield. All his life he had controlled every outcome, every decision, every risk. Yet nothing had prepared him for this. A child he had never known, a woman he had once loved, now looking at him as if he were a stranger. He could still hear the echo of her voice, calm and sharp. "Go, your wife, needs you." The word wife had never sounded so hollow. In the rearview mirror, he saw his reflection, a man in a $1,000 suit with everything and nothing. 7 years ago, he had built an empire from nothing, signing contracts worth millions, shaking hands with presidents and investors. Yet somewhere in the rise of his success, he had lost the only people who could have given it meaning. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel as he whispered to himself, "I have a son." Inside the hospital, Elena sat by Lucas's bedside, watching her boy sleep, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the monitor's steady beep. The nurse had dimmed the lights and left her alone in that fragile silence only mothers know. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, whispering softly, "You're safe now, sweetheart." But her mind was anything but calm. She had seen Henry for the first time in years, and every part of her heart wanted to collapse under the weight of old memories. She remembered the nights they had stayed up in their tiny apartment while Henry worked on his startup, believing together they could conquer the world. She remembered the day she told him she was pregnant and how the call from Singapore had changed everything. His voice had been distant, focused on numbers and investors. "Elena, this isn't the right time. I can't handle this now. We'll talk later." Later never came. When his assistant transferred money into her account 2 days later, she understood exactly what that meant. She was a problem to be solved, a distraction from ambition. She had packed her things that same night and disappeared. For years she had imagined what she would say if she ever saw him again, but when the moment finally came, her words had frozen in her throat. Henry returned home long after midnight. His penthouse overlooked the glittering skyline of the city, but tonight even the lights seemed cold. His wife Sophia lay asleep in their silk-sheeted bed, pale from her allergic reaction earlier that evening. He stood at the window staring at the city's pulse below and wondered how many choices a man could make before one of them ruined his soul. When Sophia stirred, he turned away quickly, masking his turmoil behind a practiced calm. She opened her eyes, studying him with suspicion. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said softly. "Maybe I have," he answered quietly before retreating into the shadows of the next room. At dawn, Henry returned to the hospital, claiming he needed to settle Sophia's discharge papers. But the truth was simpler. He needed to see Elena again. When he reached the cafeteria, she was already there, sitting alone by the window, a paper cup of coffee untouched in her hands. The morning light caught her hair, and for a second she looked exactly as she had years ago when he first met her laughing in the university courtyard. She noticed him before he could speak. Her expression didn't soften, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of pain. "You shouldn't be here, Henry," she said. "You've got your wife to worry about." He ignored the warning and sat across from her, his voice low and raw. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her laugh was short and bitter. "I did tell you. I called you. I begged you to listen. You were too busy closing your precious deal in Singapore. You sent money instead of coming home. What was I supposed to think? That you'd suddenly want to be a father?" Henry's throat burned. "I thought that was what you wanted too," he murmured. "Financial support. No complications." She shook her head, her voice trembling now. "You really don't understand, do you? I didn't want your money, Henry. I wanted you. I wanted our son to have his father." He couldn't look at her then. The woman he had once loved stood before him stronger than ever, and the shame was unbearable. "I need to see him again," he said finally. "Please, just once more." Elena hesitated, torn between fury and the faint tremor of calm passion she still carried for the man who had once been her world. Before she could answer, the hospital intercom crackled overhead, summoning Dr. Stevens to the ICU, and the sound startled them both. Lucas was awake now, peeking through the glass window of his room looking for his mother. Henry saw him too, and something broke inside him. He had spent years building systems to predict markets, but he hadn't foreseen this a moment that would unravel everything he thought he was. Elena turned toward him, her voice steady but cold. "You can see him," she said quietly, "but not as his father, not yet. You'll have to earn that." Then she walked away, leaving Henry standing in the pale morning light with one truth echoing louder than all his success. He had built an empire, but lost his soul, and now he would do anything to find it again. The morning after the storm of emotions, Henry Blake stood at the entrance of the ICU corridor, feeling more like a ghost than a billionaire. The hallway was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the echo of footsteps that seemed to stretch endlessly. He had spent the entire night thinking about what Elena said. Not as his father, not yet. Those words had carved themselves into his mind. For the first time in years, he felt stripped of power and privilege, left only with guilt and longing. Lucas was sitting up in bed when Henry entered the room. The boy's hair was a mess of brown curls, his hands busy building a small rocket from hospital straws and tape. Elena stood nearby, her arms folded, her eyes following every move Henry made. The air between them was fragile, a balance between past wounds and unspoken truths. Henry took a cautious step forward. "Hey there, champ," he said, his voice softer than he intended. Lucas looked up, curious but cautious. "My name's Henry," he continued, not daring to say more. Lucas blinked, studying him with quiet intelligence. Said you're a friend," he replied simply. "A friend?" Henry repeated the word silently, like a punishment. Elena's eyes didn't leave his face. "That's right," she said, "a friend who helped once upon a time." Henry nodded, his throat tight. Then Lucas smiled, a small, innocent smile that broke something deep inside him. A nurse entered, interrupting the tense stillness. "Mrs. Cruz, the doctor will discharge Lucas this afternoon, but he needs rest until then." Elena thanked her politely, but Henry barely heard the words. The realization hit him that they were leaving, and he might never see them again if she decided it was best to vanish. Later that day, as Elena gathered their things, Henry found himself standing in front of room 412, the one that belonged to his wife. Sophia was awake now, pale but alert, her eyes sharp and tired. "You disappeared this morning," she said, her voice brittle. "I had meetings." He lied automatically, but she didn't believe him. "Meetings at a hospital?" she asked quietly, her tone carrying years of unspoken distance. Henry turned away, unable to meet her eyes. In that moment, he knew their marriage had been over long before her collapse. Built on appearances, on shared power and status, not on love. He thought of Elena's quiet strength, her simplicity, her honesty, and felt the difference between real warmth and the cold comfort of luxury. As he left Sophia's room, the sound of laughter drifted down the hall. Lucas was laughing soft and pure while Elena helped him pack his toy rocket. The sight pulled Henry like gravity. He walked toward them slowly, his heart pounding. Elena looked up, catching his gaze. "Don't, Henry," she said quietly, "not here. People will talk. Let them." He replied, his voice steady. I've hidden enough truths in my life. Her expression softened for a brief second before she turned back to her son. Lucas looked between them, curiosity sparking. "Mom," he asked, "is he coming with us?" Elena froze, unsure how to answer. Henry knelt beside the boy, his eyes level with Lucas's. "Only if your mom says I can," he said, gently. Lucas tilted his head, thinking hard like he was solving a puzzle. Then he grinned. "Maybe you can come to my science fair next week," he said. "I built a robot that moves." Henry smiled, though his chest ached. "I'd like that very much." After they left, Henry stood alone in the corridor, feeling the emptiness rush back. But something inside him had shifted. For the first time, he didn't want to return to the boardroom or the luxury penthouse. He wanted to follow the sound of his son's laughter, wherever it led. That night, rain fell over the city again. Henry sat by the window of his office looking out at the skyline that once made him proud. The lights blurred through the raindrops like ghosts of every choice he had made. He remembered the moment Elena told him she was pregnant, the disbelief in her eyes when he chose work instead of her. He had told himself he was doing it for the future, but the truth was he had been afraid of needing someone more than success. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. A message flashed on the screen from an unknown number. "Thank you for helping today. Lucas was happy to see you. He wants to know if you'll come to his science fair." Henry read it 3 times, his heart thudding. Elena had texted him. For the first time in 7 years, she had reached out without anger, only cautious peace. His fingers trembled as he typed back, "I wouldn't miss it for the world." When he hit send, he realized this was his second chance. Not a business opportunity, not a strategic move, but the one thing his fortune could never buy: redemption. What he didn't know was that fate wasn't done testing him yet, and before the next sunrise, one secret would change everything again. The day of the science fair arrived under a restless sky, heavy with clouds that promised rain. Henry stood outside the small community school, feeling more nervous than he had been before any ball, usiness deal in his life. The smell of rain mixed with the laughter of children echoing from the courtyard. He adjusted his tie, realizing it made him look out of place among the other parents dressed in jeans and jackets. For once, his wealth felt like a wall, not a shield. Inside the hall, Elena was helping Lucas set up his project, a small robot made from spare parts and wires that blinked when it moved. Her hair was tied loosely, and she wore a simple blue dress that made her look effortlessly beautiful. When Henry walked in, she saw him immediately, and something unreadable crossed her face, a mix of pride, fear, and old memories. Lucas spotted him next and waved excitedly. "Dad, you came." The word hit Henry like lightning. Elena froze the paper in her hand, trembling. Henry smiled carefully, trying not to show how deeply that one word had shaken him. "Of course I came," he said gently. "I told you I would." Parents moved around the tables admiring projects, but Henry saw none of them. His eyes stayed on his son, who stood tall as he explained his creation to the judges, his voice full of excitement. Henry felt something awaken in him, a warmth he had never known, not even during his greatest successes. This was what he had missed, the simple pride of watching his child shine. When the presentations ended and the judges moved on, Henry walked outside for air. The sky had darkened, and thunder rolled in the distance. As he stood under the covered walkway, his phone rang. It was his assistant, Daniel, his voice tense. "Sir, we have a problem. The board is panicking about the merger. Investors are threatening to pull out if you don't show up for the emergency meeting tonight." Henry closed his eyes, fighting the familiar tug of responsibility. He looked through the window at Lucas laughing with his friends, then at Elena, who stood quietly watching her son. 7 years ago, he would have left without hesitation, choosing business over everything. But not this time. "Tell them I'll be in tomorrow morning," he said, and hung up before Daniel could argue. Moments later, Elena stepped outside, her expression wary. "You're risking a lot being here," she said softly. Henry shook his head, his voice firm. "I'm exactly where I should be." She looked at him for a long moment as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then her eyes softened. "He's happy you came. You made his day." Rain began to fall in thin silver lines across the pavement. They stood together beneath the awning silent, except for the sound of rain and distant laughter. For a brief moment, it felt almost like old times until a voice broke through the quiet. Henry turned and froze. Standing a few steps away was Sophia, his wife, dressed elegantly despite the storm, her eyes sharp as glass. "So this is where you've been," she said, her tone calm but cold. "I followed your driver. I had to see it for myself." Elena stepped back instinctively, her face pale. Sophia's gaze moved to Lucas, who was still inside, unaware of the tension. The resemblance was undeniable. "My God," she whispered, "so this is him." Henry's chest tightened. "Sophia, don't," he started, but she cut him off. "Does the media know, Henry? Does the board know you've been hiding a child with her?" The words hit like thunder. Elena straightened her shoulders, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You have no right to speak about him that way. He's a child, not a secret." Sophia's lip curled, a bitter smile forming. "Maybe not a secret to you, but to the world he'll ruin everything Henry built." Henry stepped forward, his voice breaking through the storm. "Enough, Sophia. This ends now. I'm done hiding the truth." Sophia's expression shifted from anger to disbelief. "You would throw away your empire for them?" she asked. He met her gaze without flinching. "I would trade every dollar for one honest day with my son." For a moment, the only sound was the rain pounding harder against the concrete. Sophia stared at him, her eyes filled with something almost like sorrow. "You've changed," she said quietly, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the storm. Elena exhaled shakily, her hands pressed to her chest. Henry looked at her, his voice rough. "I'm sorry you had to see that." She shook her head, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You can't protect us from everything, Henry. The world always finds out." He stepped closer, his voice low but fierce. "Then let it. I'll face whatever comes, but I won't lose you or him again." Thunder rolled above them, lightning flashing in the distance, casting their faces in pale light. In that moment, something powerful shifted between them, not the love of the past, but the beginning of something new, built on truth, not illusion. Neither of them knew it yet, but that storm was only the beginning, and the hardest choices were still to come. The storm that had rolled over the city the night before left the morning heavy and still, the streets washed clean, but the air charged with something electric. Henry stood in front of the glass windows of his office, the skyline stretching endlessly before him, but it no longer felt like triumph. Everything looked smaller now, the numbers on his screens meaningless compared to the image of Lucas's smile and Sophia's voice echoing through the rain. The news had already started to spread. His phone buzzed with messages from the board demanding answers, investors questioning his judgment, reporters circling like vultures. A single photo had leaked Sophia's doing, he knew, showing him with Elena and Lucas outside the school under the storm. The caption read, "Billionaire's secret family questioned." The empire he built on control and precision was beginning to crack. But Henry felt something strange. Instead of panic, he felt calm. He had spent years hiding from truth, and now that it was exposed, he finally felt free. Still, the cost would be high, and he knew it. He turned away from the window when his assistant entered, pale and nervous. "Sir, the board called an emergency session. They want and you to step down until this is resolved." Henry nodded slowly. "I'll handle it, Daniel. Alone." At the same time, Elena sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the same photo on her phone. The comments beneath it were cruel strangers calling her a gold digger, a homewrecker, people judging what they could never understand. She scrolled down until her hands trembled. Lucas's name was trending. That was when the fear set in, not for herself, but for her son. She reached for the phone and dialed Henry's number. He answered on the first ring, his voice low. "I saw it too," he said. She swallowed hard. "They're dragging his name into it, Henry. I can handle the world turning against me, but not him." He hesitated for a moment, then spoke with quiet determination. "Pack your things. I'm sending someone to bring you both to the estate. You'll be safe there." Hours later, a black car pulled up outside her apartment. Elena didn't want to go, but she knew she had no choice. Lucas held her hand as they drove past flashing cameras and curious faces. When they reached the estate, she was struck by the contrast between the grandeur of Henry's world and the simplicity of hers. The gates closed behind them like a fortress shutting out the noise. Henry met them at the entrance, no tie, his expression drawn, but resolute. Lucas ran to him without hesitation, the innocence of childhood ignoring the chaos of adults. Henry lifted him in his arms, holding him tighter than he ever had before. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. Later, when Lucas was asleep, Elena found Henry in the study, surrounded by stacks of reports and phones that wouldn't stop ringing. "You can't fight them all," she said quietly. He looked up, his eyes tired but burning with resolve. "Maybe not, but I can fight for what matters." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "And what if this destroys everything you built?" He stood facing her, now his voice firm. "Then maybe it's time something better took its place." Before she could respond, the power flickered, the house plunged into darkness for a moment, then the backup lights hummed on. The storm had returned, sudden and violent lightning splitting the night. A security guard rushed in breathless. "Sir, someone's outside the gates shouting your name." Henry's heart stopped. He moved to the surveillance screen. The image showed Sophia standing in the rain, clutching something in her hand, a small envelope soaked through. "Let her in," he said grimly. Moments later she entered, dripping wet, her expression unreadable. "You need to see this," she said, placing the envelope on the table. Inside were documents, photos, timelines. Henry unfolded them, his blood running cold. Someone was orchestrating the scandal, pushing it to the media with manufactured evidence to destroy not just his reputation, but the entire company. Elena watched fear creeping through her chest. "Who would do this?" she asked. Henry's jaw clenched. "My partner, Thomas. He's been waiting for me to fall." Sophia nodded, her tone sharp. "He wants control of the company, and he'll use anything to get it. Even your son." The realization hit like a physical blow. Henry felt a surge of rage, unlike anything he had known. "No one touches my family," he said quietly, his voice trembling with fury. Sophia stepped back, startled by the cold fire in his eyes. Outside, thunder cracked across the sky as Henry picked up his phone. "Get my lawyer," he said to Daniel, his tone calm but deadly. "We're taking the fight to them." As lightning lit up the windows, Elena stood in the doorway, watching him. In that moment, she saw not the ruthless businessman the world knew, but a man stripped down to truth, ready to burn his empire if it meant protecting the people he loved. She realized something then. Henry wasn't just fighting to reclaim his name, he was fighting to become the man he was always meant to be. And though the storm outside roared louder, she knew this was only the beginning of a far greater one about to break over all of them. The rain had not stopped for 2 days, and the mansion felt like a cage filled with secrets and echoes of the past. Henry barely slept, spending every hour on calls with lawyers and investigators trying to contain the scandal that threatened everything he had built. But the more he uncovered, the darker it grew. His partner, Thomas, had planted false stories, forged documents, and even bribed reporters to twist the truth. What began as a smear campaign had turned into a calculated attempt to destroy him. Elena moved quietly through the house, watching from the shadows as Henry fought his invisible war. He looked exhausted, but his eyes burned with purpose. Lucas stayed close to her, unaware of the chaos surrounding them, only sensing the tension in the air. Sometimes he would ask softly, "Why is Dad sad?" And Elena would smile weakly, saying he's just working on something important. That night, Henry walked into the study to find Elena waiting by the fireplace. Her face glowed in the golden light, her expression calm but worried. "You can't keep fighting this alone," she said. "You're going to break." He shook his head, his voice low. "If I stop now, everything falls apart." She stepped closer, searching his face. "What about us? What about your son?" Her words struck him harder than any attack from the press. For a long moment he said nothing, then finally whispered, "I'm trying to protect you. From them. From the world." She reached for his hand, surprising him with her steadiness. You can't protect us by shutting us out, Henry. You can't fight monsters in the dark and expect to win alone. Before he could answer, the door burst open. Daniel, his assistant, rushed in pale and breathless. Sir, we have a problem. Someone leaked private footage from the estate security cameras. It shows Miss Cruz and the boy arriving here. It's everywhere. Henry's stoma dropped. Elena covered her mouth in shock. The news spread faster than fire. By morning, every headline carried the same image: Henry Blake, the billionaire who hid his secret family. Crowds gathered outside the gates, flashing cameras through the iron bars. Reporters shouted questions while drones hovered overhead. Henry stood at the window watching the chaos beyond the walls. They were trapped. He turned to Elena, his voice tight with determination. We leave tonight. There's a safe property outside the city in the valley. No one will find us there. Elena hesitated. Running will make it worse, she whispered. Henry looked at her, his eyes dark with resolve. I'm not running. I'm regrouping. That evening, as the sky turned black, they packed in silence. Lucas clutched his stuffed dinosaur, asking where they were going. Somewhere peaceful, Henry said, forcing a smile. Somewhere safe, but deep down he knew peace was far away. Halfway down the road, headlights appeared behind them, far too close. Henry's instincts sharpened. He told the driver to turn onto a side road, but the other car followed. Elena gripped Lucas tightly, fear flashing in her eyes. Who is that? She whispered. Henry didn't answer. He had seen the same black sedan parked near his office days before. The driver accelerated as rain began to pour again, blurring the windshield. The second car swerved closer, forcing them toward the edge of the road. Henry shouted for the driver to hold steady, but the tires skidded on the wet asphalt. The world spun in flashes of light and sound until the car slammed to a stop against the guardrail. Elena held Lucas, trembling but unharmed. Henry pushed open the door, stepping into the storm. The other car had stopped a few meters behind its headlights, cutting through the rain. A man stepped out slowly, umbrella in hand, calm as if he had been waiting for this moment. It was Thomas. Henry's rage ignited. What do you want? He shouted over the thunder. Thomas smiled thinly, his voice barely rising above the rain. Everything you took from me. You built an empire on lies, Henry, and now it's my turn to clean it up. You can keep your family, but you'll lose everything else. Henry took a step forward, his fists clenched. If you come near them again, I'll destroy you. Thomas's smirk widened. You already did that yourself. Then he turned back to his car, disappearing into the storm, leaving behind the echo of his laughter. Henry returned to the car, drenched, his heart pounding with fury and dread. Elena touched his arm, her voice shaking. What did he mean by that? Henry looked at her, eyes hollow. He's not after my company anymore. He's after us. As they drove off again, the rain finally eased, but the road ahead stretched into darkness. In that silence, Elena reached across and took Henry's hand, her touch steady despite the fear. For the first time, he didn't pull away. He realized then that everything he had been running from all his life was right beside him, and though danger still loomed, he knew one truth burned brighter than any threat. He would rather lose his empire than lose them again. Dawn broke over the valley in shades of gray and silver mist curling over the distant hills as Henry guided the car down the narrow dirt road leading to an old stone cottage hidden behind rows of tall cypress trees. The world around them was silent except for the crunch of gravel beneath the tires and the steady beat of Lucas's soft breathing in the back seat. After the chaos of the city, the quiet felt almost unreal, like stepping into another life. The cottage had once belonged to Henry's grandfather, a place he hadn't visited since childhood, when things were simple before ambition turned him into someone else. As they stepped out of the car, the smell of wet earth and pine filled the air. Elena looked around, unsure, but relieved that at least for now there were no cameras, no reporters, no eyes watching them. Henry turned to her, his voice low and rough. You and Lucas can stay here. No one knows this place exists. Elena met his gaze for a long moment, then shook her head. You mean we can hide here while your world burns outside? He sighed, running a hand through his rain-soaked hair. I'm not hiding. I'm giving us time. Time to fight back. Inside the cottage, the fire crackled faintly against the chill. Lucas explored the small rooms, fascinated by the dusty books and old maps, while Elena unpacked their few bags. For a brief moment, they almost felt like a family, a fragile illusion held together by the warmth of the flames. Henry watched them quietly, realizing how much he had missed simple moments like this, the kind that never made headlines, but meant everything. Later that night, after Lucas fell asleep, Henry and Elena sat near the fire. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of responsibility pressing on him like chains. "You can't keep pretending this will fix itself," she said gently. "Thomas isn't just attacking your company anymore. He's trying to destroy you as a man." Henry nodded, staring into the flames. "He won't stop until I have nothing left." She hesitated before asking the question that had haunted her since the night of the crash. "What if he's right, Henry? What if this is your punishment for what you did to us?" He turned to her sharply, but saw no accusation in her eyes, only truth. For a long moment he said nothing, then his voice came out as a whisper. "Maybe it is. Maybe I deserve it. But not Lucas. He doesn't deserve to live in my shadow." Elena's expression softened. "Then fight for him, not against Thomas, not against the world. Fight for your son." That was when something shifted inside Henry, a realization that his war wasn't about pride or revenge, it was about redemption. The next morning he made a call from the old rotary phone on the desk. Daniel answered, groggy but alert. "I need you to gather everything on Thomas. Every deal, every offshore account, every illegal move. Quietly." Daniel hesitated. "Sir, that's dangerous." Henry's tone was calm but final. "So is doing nothing." As he hung up, he caught sight of movement outside the window. A black SUV had pulled up on the far edge of the dirt road, its lights off, its windows tinted. His body went rigid. He moved to the door, quietly signaling Elena to stay back. The engine idled for a few seconds before the SUV drove away, leaving only tire marks in the mud. Elena's voice trembled. "Henry." "Who are they?" He looked out into the mist, his jaw tight. "Whoever they are, Thomas sent them." That night, sleep refused to come. Henry sat by the window, watching the woods for movement, while the wind whispered through the trees. Sometime past midnight, he heard the faint creak of a floorboard behind him. He turned sharply and saw Lucas standing there, clutching his stuffed dinosaur eyes, half asleep. "Dad, why are you awake?" he murmured. Henry smiled softly, lifting him into his arms. "Just watching over you," he said. As he carried his son back to bed, something inside him cracked open. The empire he had once built seemed meaningless compared to the warmth of the small heartbeat against his chest. He realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of losing everything, because now he finally knew what everything truly meant. But as dawn broke again and sunlight spilled through the trees, the peace shattered. Daniel called, his voice urgent. "Sir, you need to get out of there. Thomas filed for a full federal investigation into your finances. He's claiming fraud and hiding assets. They'll be coming for you within hours." Henry froze the phone, shaking in his hand. He glanced at Elena and Lucas, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm about to strike again. His voice came out steady but cold. "Then I'll go to them before they come for me." He ended the call and turned toward the window one last time. The SUV was back parked near the road, its engine silent, but its message clear. The game had changed. Thomas wasn't trying to destroy him anymore. He was trying to erase him. Henry straightened his shoulders, his decision made. He would face the fire head-on no matter what it cost. Because this time he wasn't fighting for a company or a reputation. He was fighting for a son's future, a woman's faith, and a second chance at the life he had almost lost forever. The morning came heavy with tension and gray light pressing through the mist outside the old cottage. Henry stood by the door, fully dressed, his suitcase already packed, his expression unreadable. Elena woke to the sound of movement and found him slipping his watch onto his wrist, the same one he wore the day he left her 7 years ago. She felt her heart tighten as she asked, "Where are you going?" He looked at her with calm resolve. "I have to end this, Elena. Running won't save us anymore." She stepped forward, fear flickering in her eyes. "You said we were safe here." He nodded slowly. Safe for now, but not for long. Thomas won't stop until I'm ruined or dead. The only way to protect you and Lucas is to take the fight to him." Elena grabbed his arm, her voice trembling. "You're walking into a trap, Henry. That's what he wants." He covered her hand gently, his voice steady. "Maybe, but I'm done letting other people decide who I am." Before he left, he knelt beside Lucas's bed, brushing the boy's hair back as he slept. For a moment, he simply watched his son breathe, then whispered, "I'll come back for you, I promise." By midday, Henry was back in the city, his car weaving through streets lined with reporters. He ignored their shouts and flashing cameras and walked straight into his company headquarters, the empire that once bowed to him now waiting to devour him. The board members sat around the long glass table silent and tense, while Thomas stood near the head of the room, wearing a polished smile that didn't reach his eyes. Henry entered without hesitation, his presence cutting through the room like thunder. "You wanted a show, Thomas," he said quietly. "Let's give them one." The room fell silent as he placed a folder on the table. Inside were documents, printouts, and files, the results of Daniel's sleepless nights digging into Thomas's corruption and betrayal. Offshore accounts, hidden payments, forged contracts, everything laid bare. Thomas's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Empty accusations," he sneered. "You think you can scare me with paper?" Henry met his gaze, cold and unwavering. "Paper built this empire, and now it will bury you." Before Thomas could reply, the door burst open. Federal agents stormed in, their badges flashing. "Mr. Thomas Reed, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and corporate conspiracy." The board erupted in chaos as Thomas shouted curses while they dragged him away. Henry stood motionless, his face unreadable, until the doors closed again, leaving silence behind. Hours later, Henry walked out of the building into the blinding light of day. Cameras clicked like gunfire, but for the first time he didn't look away. He had faced the storm and somehow survived. Still, his heart was not at peace. He had won the war, but lost what truly mattered. When he returned to the cottage that evening, the fire was out and the rooms were cold. Elena and Lucas were gone. Panic seized him as he searched the house, calling their names. On the table, he found a note written in Elena's familiar handwriting. "You did what you had to do, Henry. But I can't let Lucas live in a world that only knows chaos and headlines. We need peace. If you really want us, come find us when the noise fades. Until then, protect what's left of your soul." The paper shook in his hands as he read it over and over. Outside, the rain began again, soft and relentless. He sank to his knees beside the cold hearth, his mind a storm of regret and determination. He had fought the enemy outside, but now he had to face the one within. Days turned into weeks. The company stabilized under his quiet leadership, the media frenzy aided, but the emptiness remained. Every night he sat by the window watching the road, half expecting a car to appear, headlights cutting through the dark. Then one morning a package arrived with no name, no address. Inside was a small model rocket, the same one Lucas had built at the science fair. Attached was a note in a child's handwriting. "We miss you, Dad." Henry closed his eyes, tears finally breaking free. The storm that had ruled his life for so long began to quiet. He knew what he had to do. He walked out of his office, leaving behind the empire once more, and drove toward the horizon where the hills met the morning light. He didn't know where they were or how long it would take, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing power or redemption. He was chasing home. The road stretched endlessly ahead of him, and in his heart one promise burned clear and unshakable. He would find them, he would make things right, and when he did, he would never let them go again. The road stretched endlessly beneath the gray morning sky as Henry drove through miles of open land, guided only by a faint memory and a child's handwriting. Weeks had passed since he had found the small rocket on his desk, the note from Lucas folded neatly beside it. "We miss you, Dad." Those 4 words had changed everything. He had left behind the boardrooms, the headlines, the noise of his empire, and chosen the silence of search instead. Every mile was a prayer that he was not too late. He stopped in small towns asking quiet questions, following every vague lead. A woman matching Elena's description renting a cottage near the coast. A boy with hazel eyes seen at a school fair. Each trail led him closer, but always ended in shadows. Yet something inside him refused to give up. One evening, as the sun began to set, he found himself at a seaside town called Havenport, a quiet place with cobblestone streets and fishing boats rocking gently against the docks. He parked his car near a small bakery and stepped out, the air thick with the scent of salt and bread. Something gnawing about the place felt right. He walked slowly, scanning the street, and then he saw it, a woman in a blue sundress, standing outside a bookshop, her hair caught in the wind, holding a small boy's hand. For a moment, Henry couldn't breathe. Elena turned her head, and their eyes met across the crowd. Time froze between them, the years, the pain, the distance all collapsing into one heartbeat. Lucas saw him next, his face lighting up as he shouted, "Dad!" The boy ran toward him, arms open wide, and Henry dropped to his knees, catching him in a fierce embrace. "I told you I'd find you," he whispered, his voice breaking. Elena approached slowly, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly, though her voice trembled. "The world still watches you, Henry. They'll never let us live in peace." He looked up at her eyes, burning with quiet resolve. "Then let them watch. I don't care anymore." But peace was not waiting for them. That night, as they sat by the beach under a fading sunset, Henry's phone buzzed with a single message from an unknown number. "You think it's over? It's just beginning." Attached was a photo of the three of them taken from a distance, the same beach, same moment, same sunset. Elena saw the message, and her hand tightened around his arm. "Someone's following us," she whispered. Henry looked around, scanning the shoreline, but saw only shadows. He turned off the phone and threw it into the ocean. "We're done being hunted," he said quietly. "From now on, we live on our terms." The next morning they packed again, but this time they weren't running. They were moving forward. Henry bought a small farmhouse on the outskirts of town, overlooking the cliffs where the sea met the sky. He worked with his hands, rebuilding it board by board, transforming it into a home. Elena helped paint the walls, while Lucas ran through the fields, chasing gulls and laughter. For the first time it felt real. But fate had one more twist to deliver. Late one night, as thunder rolled over the ocean, Henry sat alone at the table, sorting through old documents, when he found something strange among the papers from the company. A signed contract bearing his name, but one he had never seen before. It transferred ownership of his patents to an offshore account created by Thomas months before his arrest. Someone else had been helping him from the inside. He realized the danger wasn't gone. Someone still wanted what he had built, and maybe more. He called Daniel, who answered in a whisper. "Sir, we've been compromised. The files I sent about Thomas, they were copied before the arrest. Whoever has them now is coming for you." Henry's voice hardened. "Let them come. I'm not running again." When he hung up, he went upstairs to check on Elena and Lucas, both asleep, their faces peaceful in the glow of the fireplace. He stood there watching them, feeling a strength he had never known. This time he wouldn't fight with money or power. He would fight with truth. Outside, the storm broke open, lightning cutting across the sky. Henry walked to the window, staring into the darkness where he thought he saw the outline of a car parked near the edge of the property, lights off, engine silent. The past was still out there waiting, but he was no longer afraid. He turned back toward the sleeping forms of his family and whispered to himself, "This time I won't lose. No matter what comes, I will protect them." And as thunder rolled across the cliffs and rain pounded against the windows, Henry Blake stood ready for whatever waited in the storm, knowing that the final battle for his redemption had only just begun. The storm outside grew violent that night, the wind screaming through the cliffs like the voices of everything Henry had lost and everything he was about to fight for. The car parked near the farmhouse didn't move its The man hesitated, blinded for a second before Henry knocked him unconscious, his chest heaving in the rain. The flare arched high, bursting into crimson light over the cliffs, its reflection dancing across the water below. Henry turned to Elena, his breath ragged, his voice low. "You shouldn't have come out here." She shook her head, stepping closer. "You'd have done the same for me." Moments later, sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer. The local police arrived, arresting the man and pulling another from the parked car, both soaked and furious. One of them shouted as they were led away, "You think this ends here, Blake? You have no idea what's coming." By morning, the storm was gone, the sky washed clean. The officers confirmed what Henry already knew. The attackers were hired by someone still operating behind the scenes, remnants of Thomas's allies trying to finish the job. But for now, it was over. The sun broke over the cliffs, spilling light across the farmhouse. Henry stood outside, watching the ocean, golden and endless. Elena stepped beside him, her hand finding his. "It's finally over," she said quietly. He nodded, though part of him knew peace was something a man had to choose, not something handed to him. Later that evening, they gathered on the porch, Lucas sitting between them, his head resting on Henry's shoulder. "Dad?" he asked softly. "Are we safe now?" Henry smiled faintly, kissing the top of his son's head. "Yes, we are. We're home now." Days turned into weeks, and slowly life found rhythm again. The farmhouse became their world, laughter echoing through the halls once filled with silence. Henry rebuilt his company not as a giant empire, but as something smaller, more honest, focused on innovation that healed rather than consumed. He named it after his son, calling it Project Lucas, a promise that the future would always have heart. One afternoon, as the three of them walked along the sea lifts, the sea wind lifting their hair, Henry stopped, turning to face Elena. "There's something I never asked," he said softly. "When you left 7 years ago, did you ever stop loving me?" She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes shining. "I tried," she whispered, "every day. But love doesn't disappear, Henry. It waits for the right version of the person to return." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box, not the lavish kind he once used, but a simple wooden one carved with initials. He opened it, revealing a single silver ring. Elena gasped, her hand trembling. Henry's voice was steady. "I don't have fortunes or titles anymore. But I have truth, and I have you. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered yes, and Lucas cheered, his laughter rising above the crashing waves. Henry slipped the ring onto her finger, and for the first time in years, the weight on his heart lifted. As the sun set behind them, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Henry looked out over the sea, knowing his journey had come full circle. The man who once chased power had finally found purpose. The billionaire who once ran from love had found home. And when night fell and the stars shimmered above the quiet valley, he whispered into the wind a vow that carried farther than any fortune. "No matter where life takes me, I will always find my way back to you."